Good morning and welcome to the Core Connection. I'm Mira Rubin here with you on the Enlightened World Network. And today's topic is busyness and how we often engage in all kinds of doing of peripheral things to avoid the things that are truly calling for our attention. So we'll have a conversation about that in a little bit. But before we get started, let's take a deep breath in through your nose and hold it. And imagine clean, crisp oxygen flooding your lungs, flowing into your bloodstream, nourishing all your cells, all your organs, bringing vital life energy to your body and being. And as you exhale any tension, stress, negativity, fatigue. And now let's take another deep breath in through your nose and hold it. This time, imagine brilliant, bright light lighting you up from the inside out, illuminating, electrifying, and energizing all your cells, your molecules, your electrons, creating a brilliant beam of light and energy from your heart out into the world. And as you exhale any remaining tension, stress, negativity, fatigue. And now let's press our palms together. Vigorously rub your hands together to feel the friction, the motion, the temperature, the pressure, the tickling and tingling when you stop. Allow yourself to use all these sensations to become present right here, right now, into this remarkable physical form that enables you to experience life. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Good morning. Good morning, Rosalind. Good morning to everybody else who's joining us this morning. Welcome. It's great to be here with you. Rosalind, I just want to say what a gift it is to me that you show up here every day. It truly is wonderful to be partnering in this with you. You give me the inspiration and the impetus to keep doing this. So I just want to thank you so much. Anyway, we're talking about busyness, and this is something that we get to look at, I think, because oftentimes we use our doing to keep us from being. We use all our busyness as a way to avoid either looking at ourselves or being present to what's going on with us. Like we use it as a distraction and a diversion. Or we can use it as an avoidance to be avoiding doing other things so that we still feel productive, So it was really interesting when I was in the process of writing a book. I found my house was impeccably clean because I spent a lot of time avoiding sitting down to write. And it was a textbook that I was writing, but it was really interesting to see all the behaviors that I adopted to avoid things. And one of those behaviors is eating. And then I don't know that would necessarily characterize as busyness, but cooking, and eating is one way that we avoid things. But another way that we avoid things is by cleaning or by doing other tasks that are on the list of to-dos, but they're nowhere near the top. And it's something that we're allowing ourselves to get distracted by in order to avoid doing something else that is really calling for our attention. So that's on one level. Another level is that if we're always doing and we're always engaged in doing, accomplishing, then we don't really have the time or the quiet necessarily for self-reflection, for being present to what's there. And so part of this conversation comes from a conversation that I had yesterday with someone who was a professional athlete and a professional performer from the time they were a little kid. And so their context for their lives was really performance, was really based on doing. And what resulted from that is that their sense of self-worth was very closely tied to their doing. And overriding whatever their being was calling for, just to say, well, I'm feeling this way or that way or the other way in this moment. Well, put it aside and do what needs to be done. And that busyness is a way that we can avoid dealing with our own stuff, dealing with the dynamics that are happening for us under the surface. And it's becoming clearer and clearer to me how important putting our attention on the inner environment is for our health and well-being, and also actually for our productivity. That when we are more attuned to what goes on internally, we can better accommodate the requirements, the external requirements, I think. At least that's what I've seen. And so toughing it out or ignoring it or putting it on the back burner might be an important thing to do in a temporary kind of context. And those things that we put on the back burner, if they aren't addressed, will come back to haunt us. And so this busyness piece is often something that occurs with people that just have so much mental noise that they're wanting to quiet and or to drown out. And I tend to believe that dealing with that mental noise, directly, rather than trying to drown it out, can actually eliminate it, can actually create that sense of quiet, that sense of peace. And culturally, we have been so deeply indoctrinated to this culture of doing, where our value is determined by our accomplishments and by other externalities. That it's we call people lazy who are not doing, right? And there's a negative interpretation to that kind of behavior. Rosalind says, are we avoiding? What is underlying the busyness? Fear, rejection, or suppressing? All of the above, perhaps, right? As we do, some people feel like they're unworthy if they don't do all the time. So what they might be doing is avoiding that feeling of unworthiness, to create value for themselves in the world by doing. The thing is, the underlying conversation or potential that this goes back to is the opportunity to allow ourselves to move into an experience of sufficiency. And with that experience of sufficiency, what that means is that we don't have to prove ourselves to anyone or anything. That we are sufficient in and of ourselves. Now, socially, that could be problematic because we have a social structure that deeply values the doing and the accomplishment. And there are times when there are things that need to be done. The idea, though, is that when we move from a space of sufficiency, it's not that we'll do nothing, it's that we'll be inspired to do things that are in alignment with our essence. And so many people who go through life being very busy, doing all this busyness, what can happen as a result is that relationships suffer. So how many of us grew up in an era where dad was at work all the time and not spending a whole lot of family time because he was busy earning a living, and he was busy with other things that kept him from the family in the name of the family, right? There's a big irony there that we get to explore a bit. And the consequences of this do more mentality. And if we want to talk about the notion of more, what's generating it? If more is better, when is enough? Do we get to be at a place of enough? And that again is getting to a place of sufficiency where we have enough. It doesn't mean that there's a stop there, but there's, when we have an experience of enough, then there are more choices that are available to us. The drivers can be different because what just came in my mind is the image of the goldfish who grows to the size of its bowl and to the limits of its container. And we can look at ourselves in that way on so many different levels, but so much of what we have and what we acquire and what we do is founded in this striving for something more. And if we're striving for something more, on the other side of that is scarcity, right? On the other side of that is the experience of not enough, of not being enough. And so part of our busyness or our doingness is driven often by feeling inadequate. And then the busyness is allowing us, it's a way to allow us to feel productive while we're avoiding something else, or it's maybe just a distraction even. But in the context of that distraction, what's the cost? What we get to do, how to combat this busyness, is to be looking really at priorities. And we've talked about this multiple times, where people just feel overwhelmed with so much to do, and people deliberately, while unconsciously oftentimes, but deliberately fill up and overfill their schedules so that they're constantly in a state of demand and overwhelm. And this is really interesting. Like, my mom is 92, and she has said to me, she had this big pile of paperwork, and she said, well, part of her, it was afraid to complete the pile of paperwork because then she would die. She wouldn't have anything else to live for. And I thought that was such an interesting observation, that the doingness gives us a sense of purpose in some way. The doingness gives us a focus and meaning, which is really, really interesting. If I have all these things to do, then I'm doing something worthwhile. And the thing is that a lot of the things that we do, we prioritize. They're unimportant, but we prioritize them because maybe socially or culturally they're more important. So what if cleaning wasn't as important to me as doing artwork, for example? What if I were to say, you know what, that creative outlet is actually more important than vacuuming the floor for the third time this week, for example? And so we're looking at maybe reprioritizing to enable ourselves to not have to be caught in this doingness. So Rosalind says, I imagine parents going through this. What happens when the kids leave the house? Exactly. Like, what do? You've been doing all this stuff with the kids all the time, constant demands, and now what? And so, yeah, I think that that's a real thing, Rosalind. It's like, okay, so now what's my purpose? What's my function? And so we've talked about how to relieve busyness in terms of practical terms, but I'm going to talk about it again. And we can talk about the 4 quadrants of priority. So on the upper left side of the quadrant is urgent and important. And those are the things that we can prioritize. And then on the upper right-hand side of the quadrant is important, but not urgent. And those are often the things that we don't prioritize. Those are often the things that all the other things are put above them in the to-do list. So like cleaning on top of the art. So the art might be really important, but not urgent. So it falls to a lower place on the list. And then in the lower left quadrant is urgent, but not important. So things pulling at you, but they're not really important. And we get to maybe eliminate those things or maybe delegate those things. And then in the lower right-hand quadrant is not urgent, and not important. And lots of the stuff that we do falls into that category. Lots of the stuff when we're being busy, when we're doing busyness, a lot of the stuff that we're doing is not urgent and not important. And one of the big antidotes to this busyness stuff is to allow those things to fall off the list completely, the things that are not urgent and not important. And what is required in evaluating that is looking at our actual values, what's truly important to us. So for me, email's not a priority. And maybe that makes me an anomaly or irresponsible or whatever you want to say, but email, I don't attend to it with regularity. It's not urgent and it's not important, usually. If someone wants to reach me, there are other ways to reach me. And that seems to, it eases my burden substantially to not be having to spend endless amounts of time every day going through email. So it's interesting. It's interesting to be looking at these 4 quadrants, especially, when we're looking at busyness, it's like, what am I avoiding, for one? Another factor around busyness actually is control. So feeling like you need to be in control, and underneath control might be perfectionism. And that was coming up with this person that I was speaking with yesterday as well. So if I'm in a role that has lots of requirements, there's a lot in that role that might be urgent but not important for me to do. It may be urgent and important that it get done, but maybe that's something that I can delegate. Rosalind says control, that's a big one, big time, exactly. So a lot of the busyness that we have might be running around doing all these things to keep things under control, because nobody else could do it as well as I could, or to have a sense of order. So this is another thing, people who have experienced massive disruption in their lives often are super controlling. And a lot of the doingness that they have is about controlling the environment, keeping it orderly so that they have a sense of control. And that's a very interesting phenomena too, is that everything has to be just so. And why does everything have to be just so? Because we want to nurture the illusion of the control over the chaos, to protect ourselves from the unknown, and which it doesn't do. We're not necessarily protecting ourselves from the unknown by keeping things organized in the house, for example. There's a lot of doingness around that, like majoring in minor things, like I know somebody who spends a lot of time like looking at old bills for utility bills, for example, to see how many kilowatt hours they're using from month to month, and so that they can be aware of it. And for what purpose? Is it changing their behavior? No, but to me, and that's, we all have our different priorities. to me, that's majoring in minor things. Like that is not going to move the needle in my life in terms of things that I can do. I would much prefer to enjoy reading a book or watching a movie even than making that a priority, making that something that's important. So, again, going back to the quadrant, what's urgent and important, and what's just pleasure, what's relaxing. Are we lazy if we relax? If we allow ourselves to do nothing, is that laziness? And even if it is that wrong? So Rosalind says, so what factors contribute to focus? Oh, that's such a good question. My first response to that as a possibility is motivation. The more motivated I am to be engaged in something, the more focused I can be typically. And I think what attends to a lack of focus is that we're distracted by other things, maybe because we're not as deeply motivated. So I guess the question is, how do we create a space of focus, maybe eliminating some of those distractions, letting stuff drop off the list. It's interesting, with this busyness thing, I talked about cleaning, and I've been noticing that I'm cleaning more. And this is as I'm digging more deeply into building this course, and there are certain benchmarks that I'm faced with, and part of me is avoiding what I have to do them to get them done. And so I'll clean because that makes me feel productive. I mean, it's nice to be in a clean environment. I like it when it's clean. And I just noticed that that's something that I too do to avoid, or to give myself some space, to give myself a little relief from the stress that I'm creating for myself around the thing that I'm resisting doing. It's interesting. It's like this cascading effect, where you feel stress about doing something, so you find something else to do to avoid it. It's really, really interesting. So we get to observe these things, hopefully without judgment, by just observing them with curiosity and say, oh, isn't it interesting? All these things are clean now. And what progress have I made with that? Like what are the scales? What are the balances that are showing this this imbalance? What are the scales that are showing this imbalance that we then get to be curious about? And maybe in the curiosity, it allows us to address it more directly. So if you're finding yourself endlessly busy, take a look and maybe ask, is there something I'm avoiding in this busyness? And then go down that rabbit hole of discovery. So that's it for this morning. I'm Mira Rubin. This is the Core Connection, and I go live each weekday morning here on the Enlightened World Network Facebook page and YouTube channel at 9 a.m. Eastern. And I am so grateful to you for engaging in these conversations and really having the willingness to look at ourselves with some humor and curiosity, and to use all of it in pursuit of our greater expression and expansion. So with that, until next time, lots and lots of love.